Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are back here with our round 7. We're moving quite along nicely, and we have seen so many great matches already as of just now as well. I had a little sneak peek, and you have been able to interview as well the winner of round 6 there. So do tell me a bit about it, because I did miss a bit about it.
Well, I mean, Juan was just breaking down how close of a set that really was versus Michael there. And the fact of the nuances when it comes to looking at how you can train any sort of type of, let's say, Paradox Pokemon, or just generally speaking, in particular, the Flutter Mains, both on Juan's side as well as Michael's side. They're actually both geared to deal a lot of damage whilst having that additional bulk trained into them. Something ridiculous, not what you would commonly expect to see. For example, a Palafin just going ahead and just dishing out a Water Terra type boosted Jet Punch, which is further boosted by a Mystic Water. Commonly, you would expect that to pick up a KO onto a Flutter Main, right?
Honestly, yeah.
Basically is super paper-thin frail when it comes to its physical defense.
That's what I would think.
That's what you would think.
Yeah.
But not in this case. Not on both of the players' case, as it was able to survive quite handsomely to, whilst over on the other hand, and apologies, we just got, let's say, the choice of either going for the Steel type Terra on the Flutter Main over on Michael's side versus that of the Fairy type over on Manuel's side. There was a lot of back and forth, but essentially what we saw was that the set was so close it could have gone to either player, and it was just decided on a damage roll. That, honestly, it's part of the game that we play, but naturally speaking, you just have to be lucky and hope that, like you've said before, Lady Luck actually is in your favor. And that's what turned out to be a very great battle between both of them.
Yeah, that can make the difference, that little bit of luck. But that is, like, I did see that Jet Punch, but that's all I saw from the stream itself. but I thought it was like intimidated or anything. But just hearing the way it was trained like that, that is just impressive to see. And that is that little bit of extra that you can do with that Flutter Main and other Pokemon that team sheets just don't have that, give that information out. And that is one of the things that have happened today, and a lot more. Let's be honest, we have had a lot of great matches that everyone can rewatch, luckily as well, if you should have missed it. But the next one will be great as well, because we are at round 7, meaning all these players, the next one might decide if they get day 2 immediately as well, because when you have 7 wins, you are guaranteed for day 2, meaning you get to come back tomorrow for that Swiss, for those 5 rounds of Swiss as well.
Exactly. Swiss day 2, it is something which is very hard to be able to accomplish, especially by, let's say, round 7. So most notably, it is going to be the undefeated players that are able to do that, having both of these trainers, which will likely get a reveal of the pairings very shortly. Being at 6-0 is very impressive. You know, you've got to have a lot of mental stamina as well as physical stamina to do incredibly well at this point. You know, you got to make sure that, of course, you're keeping yourself hydrated, you're keeping those energy levels going, and staying a bit out of your own head, because that is something incredibly difficult to do when there's so many different factors to process.
Exactly, and on screen you can see the people who have been scoring those 6 wins already, just making sure that they are as close as possible to that next day as well. We have some names that we have already are quite known. Thomas Gravouille, for example, is a French player, quite experienced, has been doing well these last tournaments as well. Seeing that name again as well, we have, of course, Alex Gomez, also pretty well known, very good player to see. And again, like earlier, as we said, some names are meant to be there.
Well, yeah, I mean, we had a chat with Alex Gomez as well earlier on the floor when we were speaking to Guillermo Castilla. We're also talking about with Rafael Bosutil as well as Juan Manuel. So it was quite interesting to actually find out that Guillermo was essentially quite crucial into team building, and Alex is actually using his friend's team and doing incredibly well as well. He's kind of undefeated at the moment, which is pretty strong.
Yeah, you sometimes friends loan each other's teams. You know, that is that community feeling as well. Yeah, and that is the great thing about VGC. You have those rental teams, for example, that you can use and like see, like, is this something that I would like to play as well? And honestly impressive to see that even if a good friend of yours can make a team perfect for yourself.
Well, exactly. I think it's with a lot of love.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
And a lot of care. But of course, we do have a bit of a standings too between the 17th and 32nd position currently. A couple of other very familiar names. We've seen Niels already featured, of course, in the earlier stream. If I'm not mistaken, it must have been round two.
Yes, I believe.
Round two, where he was able to get the win, 2-0 versus Abbas.
Yep. Taran as well.
Exactly, Taran, which we have featured, the very recent Perth regional champion, of course, just a couple of weeks ago. Really someone to keep your keen eye on. He's got a lot of potential. He's had a ridiculous amount of consistency going on with a lot of online events, of course, during, let's say, the more of the grassroots era, as well as the live events too. So at the current moment, I believe he may actually be in the lead when it comes to the EU leaderboard of championship points, eyeing most definitely those travel awards and stipends.
That is, of course, the final goal of this event. Winning this event is just the first step, then you and getting those points, because afterwards you want to have those points and go to potential worlds. Or firstly, we have to talk about EUIC, of course, as well. EUIC being the next European event, gonna be having with that Regulation C, of course, and I'm very looking forward to that too. A little bit of a mix-up and seeing what those 4 new Pokemon will bring to the metagame.
Well, yes, the treasures of Ruin, right? They're going to be bringing not only their abilities, which are very, very interesting to say the least, but they also have access to a signature move, something that we've actually seen in common with the Guardians of Alola back in the Sun and Moon era. It's called Ruination, but essentially it functions pretty much the same as Super Fang. It's able to half the damage, or should I say the HP of any target that it does lock into. The nice thing about it, in contrary to the Super Fang move, it's not a normal type. It can land on ghost types because it is a dark type move.
Exactly, like before, with that Nature's Madness also being able to have those moves, being able to hit everything really, and that is one of the things that, for example, Mousehold does run Super Fang struggle with against Ghosts. So if Mousehold had something like that, it would have been great, but of course we don't want to have that. Don't
make it too busted.
No, exactly. But it is gonna be an interesting addition because those Ruinous Pokemon as well, there's 2 of them that lower the attack, and one of them lowers the attack, the other one the special attack, making sure that the game could go a bit slower as well. So those attacks could be very great to dealing as much damage as you can to them, because, well, you want to have the KOs, of course, as well.
Oh, 100%. I think there's a lot of different ways to actually go about it based on what kind of strategy as a player that you have. You know, your play style is quite dependent on it. Do you want to go for the full offense sort of a direction where you could go ahead and have a couple of the Pokemon to better utilize and drop the defensive stages of your opponents, including your partner Pokemon, which isn't the Ruin Pokemon. That's just something to note. But yes, so I think we had seen, for example, there's Chi and Pao as well, accompanied by that Dragonite back when we weren't 100% sure on what the regulations were, and we had a couple of grassroots tournaments set up. So we saw the ferocity and power that, for example, that combination with the normal Terra type did actually bring, accompanied by the extreme speed.
That is incredibly true. Just Xin Pao also being incredibly fast and having a decent attack stat as well. A little bit less bulky, but honestly, you don't really need that when your main ability lowers the defense that of the opponent.
Sort of Ruin, right?
Sort of Ruin, that's the one. And just Dragonite next to it with that X3 speed priority, just making sure everything goes down at that time. It was quite spectacular to see that in the beginning phases. To see what people were running, because we've also had Chi-Yu then next to Fluttermane, I believe. That was like dropping the, making sure that the special defense will be dropped, and Chi-Yu very offensive on that special side together with that Fluttermane, just dealing massive amount of damage.
I mean, I don't think Alex Soto would be quite happy
that is
with
true.
That
is true.
That he has been bringing if he's faced against these Ruinous Pokemon, because all of them do share that dark typing accompanied by their second dual typing based on the type of Pokemon they are. So, for example, like you said, the Chi-Yu, we've got the Dark Fire, which the female Indeedee and Armarouge sort of set up isn't a big fan of. You know, there's a lot of ways to actually shut that mode down and not only deal big amounts of damage, but also get that damage mitigation. Even though you'd think, okay, maybe get a snarl or something like that, that'd be nice. But it actually deals a lot of damage due to its ability, the Beads of Ruin.
Exactly. Those Pokemon will bring a lot of changes, I feel, to the game itself. It will be interesting to see what people will bring. We have explored a lot of this Paldea decks already. We have seen the basic Pokemon before without the Paradox Mons, yes. And then when the Paradox Mons were also discovered, seeing these right now in action, seeing pretty much almost all of them as well. Iron Valiant, I haven't seen quite a bit, actually.
Iron Valiant has been one of those Pokemon where I feel like it's been quite unfortunate, its position. Most notably, its speed tiering. It's just slower than Roaring Moon, which isn't exactly what you would like. I think there's a sort of structure that we've seen in the past where it kind of only runs 1 or 2 items, I feel. Likely to be the case of maybe a Focus Sash, because it's quite frail, even though it can get those very offensive Spirit Breaks going. I think that move, for example, we're more accustomed to see it with Grimmsnarl, as it's able to not only deal very good same type attack bonus damage, but also does drop the special attack of its target. So absolutely great utility going into any sort of especially offensive Pokemon.
Yeah, now that you mention it, Grimmsnarl, because I actually haven't seen any Grimmsnarls yet today.
Oh, I have.
Oh, you have?
Yes, it was the pin on Jamie Boyd's jacket. That is the only Grimmsnarl I've
Well,
seen.
because like Grimmsnarl, still interesting Pokemon, of course. As you said, with that move, blowing the special attack, and it has access to Prankster, having access to that Reflect, Light
Parting Shot as well.
Parting Shot, yeah, newly added as well. It is still very interesting to have, but not really seeing it right now. I feel like the metagame has shifted a bit away from the Grimmsnarl a bit more. And, well, in the beginning, I felt like for Series 2, a lot of Golago was seen, but not a lot of Golago was seen because Fluttermane was the new toy to play with, the new Ghost type. But now, moving a bit further ahead in time, now Golago and Fluttermane are both quite relevant as well.
I think that the sort of transition with that is the fact that you don't have a lot of wiggle room when it comes to how many offensive Pokemon with high pressure exist in the current meta. Surely, maybe Series 1, you could start going ahead and have a couple of screens set up, like the Light Screen, Reflect, Light Clay sort of set that Grimmsnarls do tend to run, with the sort of Parting Shot pivot action going. Since it's the Prankster, it's able to get it off first, get something safer in return. But now it's just, we've got such high-octane play, which is basically the meta at the current moment. We've got all of these big, heavyweight threats dealing damage. Fluttermane, we've got the Iron Bundles, which is really good with just positioning. Golden Go, it kind of feels like it's dropped off only because Fluttermane has risen so much, and when you want to go for a water-type Golden Go, you have to contest against a Freeze Drive from the Iron Bundle, so it kind of limits its room of comfortability when it comes to going into this meta.
That is very much true because, of course, Golago being a bit slower than the Fluttermane, not the slowest of the bunch, but Fluttermane and Iron Bundle, both Pokemon that are used quite often together as well, because they work very well together because they're both very fast, and the Icy Wind control. You have now, of course, the Encore with it as well, trying to make sure that if your opponent went for a potential Protect, to make sure that they will regret that the next turn as well.
Well, yeah, but you got to be very careful. I think you got to be very careful. We've seen the rise, of course, of Dragonite. I think it's become one of those very consistent Pokemon. You've got Inner Focus as an ability. Obviously, there is multi-scale, but I feel like that has dropped a bit. But the important thing is the fact that you can go ahead and ignore any sort of intimidates, flinches. You always have a dedicated way to deal as much as maximum damage you can. Unless, I think we saw it earlier on stream, must have been game 1, where there was a breaking swipe interaction going. Not exactly the best matchup when you're going up against a Roaring Moon and you feel like you're forced to Terra outside of the Dragon type, because you have those drops still oncoming from it.
Yeah, even though changing your typing, making sure you not hit super effectively, but like that lowering of attack. Just
It's very big.
Yeah, it's big. It's well, especially for like something like Dragonite, can be a bit annoying to deal with. But that's the fun thing about Terra Blast, actually. So if the attack stat keeps getting lowered, and should get lowered than the special attack stat, so the Dragonite would be using its Terra Blast with its best stat, best attack stat, being that special attack, which is something very funny that can happen, of course, if you still if your Dragonite is still trained enough in that special attack to see it.
That directly reminds me of a match that I had with that I was casting with Ben, and it was over the Great Tusk and its interaction with Intimidate at the time, I believe. There wasn't Sun that was set on the field just yet. However, there was an Intimidate drop onto a Great Tusk. On one side of the field, we see the weather was set, and then all of a sudden, Photosynthesis, instead of boosting its attack, it boosted its speed because of that interaction of, at the time, the attack stat was lower than the speed stat.
That is one. That could be an amazing tech to, like, if you're prepped for that and you know that, that is some next level
we
thinking.
weren't ready for it because we were just like, and the Great Tusk moves first. We were like,
I mean, that's
what's
quite
going on?
impressive to see because
it wasn't Scarf. I was like, surely this shouldn't be happening. Something's wrong with the game. It's broken. But
like,
no, it wasn't. It
sometimes
was,
the Intimidate's working your way. Like, honestly, those are like the interactions with Pokemon that are can really help, like that knowledge of it as well. Just being able to make sure that you are to try and twist that to your advantage. For example, like if you know your opponent is going to set up Trick Room. Switch to, for example, to King Gambit, and suddenly you have the slowest Pokemon, like one of the slowest Pokemon on the field, which could very much deal a lot of damage.
Well, core mechanic knowledge and experience is so crucial, especially with these sort of interactions where you may not 100% count for it, and it's sort of edge case. You're not expecting it, or you haven't experienced it before, and you're like, oh, okay, you don't even think about it. But then it happens, you're like, oh, wait, what a second. This just completely threw my plans of the strategy out of the window.
Exactly. I've had it, for example, an interaction of Follow Me and Dragon Darts. Dragon Darts, exactly. Dragon Darts being a move that normally hits both Pokemon once. With Follow Me, it would hit that Pokemon twice, but if it faints before it before the second move, the second one doesn't even come out anymore.
Yeah, well, exactly. I think it's not what you would expect. You'd say, okay, surely the little droopy, a second one's going to come out, but no, it does not. However, we do have our trainers. It seems like, apologies, there was a bit of a mix-up at the time. We got our trainers, and they are Xabier Arauzo versus Amin Lehna.
Yes, and we see that Xabier, as in the 2017 Madrid Special, got to the top 4 there, and at EUIC got the top 32 as well. And so pretty interesting to see what will come out here as well. But we will shortly show, of course, the teams as well, trying to see what players will be winning here. Both of these players seem to be 5-1, meaning that, well, either of these players like to not lose anyway, but if they win 2 more times, that means they are able to get into that beautiful Day 2 Swiss. And we have the teams here. We see the Iron Hands and the Amoonguss, Pelipper, Palafin, Baxcalibur, and Dragonite, and this seems to remind me of a certain team in another regional.
It may have, or should I say, is it a regional, or is it the Oceania International Championship, perhaps? But we got Double Dragon coming out from Xavier's side. It's going to be that Baxcalibur and Dragonite. Palafin, of course, most notably, it works so well in combination with the Pelipper and Amoonguss core. I think it does so good in being able to reposition the board state and sort of manipulate it to your advantage. You've got speed control, accessibility on the Pelipper. You do have that huge amount of damage output on both of these dragons, which we've got multi-scale on Dragonite, which is very worth noting. Not the common inner focus. Doesn't seem like there's a need at the time for this sort of team structure.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the other side, we have the Great Tusk, Glimora, Tatsugiri, Dondozo, Iron Bundle, and Dragonite. Now, this is a team that we have seen before, where the Glimora tries to poison as much as possible. But earlier we had a match like that as well. But it was a bit more difficult because of that Amoonguss. Amoonguss just being able to get rid of any potential toxic spikes thanks to the ability of the toxic debris from the Glimora. And then the Tondozo and Tatsugiri had to try do as much damage on their own in the second and the third match, because it was kind of hard to pivot around that Amoonguss on its own. The main thing that I noticed as well is this Iron Bundle is running Hydro Pump.
Oh, it is indeed. So no Encore to be found. A very similar team to what we've seen earlier on in the stream. The Glamora does, of course, have the Mortal Spin accessible to it. It's got the Assault Vest, which is quite nice as well. I mean, at the moment, doesn't have any achievements from what we've seen. So a more newer trainer to the competitive scene, but so far doing incredibly well for himself, being at 5-1 at this level of competition is no easy thing at all. So it's going to be quite interesting to actually see how both of these trainers are going to be focusing here. I think some things worth noting are, of course, the Iron Bundle. How much work can it put up against a team such as Xabier, where we've got a lot of Pokemon that are susceptible to it in a super effective way?
Exactly. Like, to its stabs, a lot of Pokemon are weak to it. It is going to be interesting to see how that Terra mechanic, of course, will help. And we do see that Iron Bundle lead, but on the other side, with the Glamora and the Iron Bundle, its booster energy activated, while the Palafin and the Baxcalibur are in. Now, it does seem to be the Iron Bundle will be the fastest thing onto the field, but now really having to decide what to do. That Palafin, most of the time, it would be switching out, because, of course, you want to get that hero form, trying to get as powerful as possible, while this Baxcalibur, already being quite powerful and quite bulky as well, if I may add, can deal a lot of damage as well with any potential Gleaf Rush, for example.
Well, you've got the option of just going straight for the damage at the current moment. You don't have something necessarily stopping you on doing that. You do obviously have to take into consideration the Glamora and how that may be trained. Baxcaliburs don't tend to be as fast as you would initially think. Glamoras are a bit dependent. Assault Vest will likely mean that it is a bit more bulky and might be a bit slower in comparison, but you do have the option of the Grass Terror there, so it's just going to come down to whether you're expecting that sort of play coming out from the Baxcalibur or not. But we're just going to have to see, as the Baxcalibur does go for the Poison Terror type right now. Does want to not allow the Glamora any room for getting additional good damage onto it.
Okay, and we do see the Protect from the Iron Bundle, as we do from the Palafin as well. This Poison Terra could pose to be very interesting, because Mortal Spin will no longer poison, of course, the Baxcalibur. We actually see the Power Gem going into Baxcalibur, trying to hit that super effectively, because, of course, Ice being very weak to Rock there. Now, just protecting, scouting out with that Palafin, what is going to happen? Can switch, or tries to switch, likes to switch there, because that Palafin still not as strong, but just trying to see what the options were. We have seen that Iron Bundle went for Protect, meaning that it cannot go for another, well, would like not to go for another Protect, that is.
It may be a bit suggestive as to what other Pokemon Xabier has in the back. It might be a Palafin or an Amoonguss or even a Dragonite, which we know are all susceptible to the Ice typing there. We see Jet Punch does come out from the Palafin into the Glamora, doesn't even need to try to switch out. It's just the Zero form, but it's going to be taking the Freeze Dry, which it does survive on 18 hit points. Ice Skull Crush, Retaliation, and oh my lord, the Glamora is able to survive on this most sliver of health as I've seen, while setting up a second layer of toxic debris, and it is of itself missing the KO onto Baxcalibur. So some very well-trained Pokemon here.
Honestly, these Pokemon are excellently trained, and seeing like what the possibilities could be. Of course, Palafin having that Jet Punch in its arsenal, being able to click that to that Glamora. But on the other hand, does it really want to take another Freeze Dry from this Iron Bundle? Iron Bundle itself, of course, being one of the fastest Pokemon on the field. Luckily, Baxcalibur and the Palafin both have those priority moves that can do a bit. As we see the Jet Punch into the Glamora, finally taking it out as well, meaning this Glamora not going to put any more toxic spikes up, as we see the Ice Shard just trying to make sure that it would have gone down.
Yes, indeed, as we are going to be seeing the Baxcalibur does so due to the Life Orb recoil. At this point, I think Xabier was just wanting to prioritize on dealing as much damage as possible, maybe suggestive of a core duo that he is waiting to bring in from the back in a healthy state, which I think from what we can see on our screens is going to be the Amoonguss and Dragonite. However, Xabier has now lost his capability of getting a new Terra type going due to the mechanic already being utilized on the back Excalibur, but Amin is not in the same situation. Amin does actually have a Terrastalize available for themselves to utilize, and maybe even a Tatsugiri in the back, seeing that the Dondozo looks a bit lonely without it.
Yeah, it's well, it's not the most. It's the Pokemon that does like to be on the field alone, it seems, until of course that Tatsugiri coming in inside of its mouth. Now, very interesting to see because the Iron Bundle still being on the field. Of course, having access to those Ice-type moves where Dragonite is quite afraid of them. And honestly, while Amoonguss is quite bulky, is also not that big of a fan of those Ice-type moves.
No, it really isn't, and I think that's what we identified, and I think Amin has done a really good job about it too. Its crucial role, or should I say the Iron Bundle's crucial role in this matchup, hence why we are going to be seeing it switched out right now, likely indeed to be the Tatsugiri. So this is quite nice for Amin. You're able to go ahead, and if you do have any sort of Pokemon focusing down that slot, you can just go ahead and completely ignore it. But I am anticipating, with that play, a Grass Terra type coming out from the Dondozo. It just makes so much sense, especially against the Pokemon that Xabier does have now on the field. And the fact that this Dragonite, due to the fact that it cannot go and Terra type anymore, can't take advantage of Terra Blast. So all of a sudden we see there is no flying stab move that this Dragonite can dispatch onto the Dondozo for any sort of counterplay.
Exactly. We do see the Dragonite going for that Protect, trying to see what is going to happen here if the switch out to the Tatsugiri was inevitable, as we do see the attack from the Dondozo into that Dragonite as well. While the Amoonguss tries to go for a Spore, but unfortunately it does not affect that Dondozo anymore because it does have that Grass Terra typing. Now, there is something interesting about this now mechanic as well, because Dragonite right now does have one move that is super effective, at least to it. Earthquake doing quite a bit of damage, and we do see the Ice Spinner doing a bit of damage to this Dondozo. You have to realize Dondozo is quite bulky on its own, and we have the Pollen Puff trying to make sure that the Dragonite would stay alive as well.
Quite interesting interaction there. I think it makes a lot of sense for Amin to actually prioritize taking down the Amoonguss. It does have Protect, but we're in a situation where Xabier feels very comfortable on having the Pollen Puff plus multi-scale play available for themselves, just allowing this Dragonite's longevity to further extend itself. We do have leftovers available on the Dondozo, so going for the every other Protect turn makes a lot of sense. You just want to go ahead and keep on recovering HP at the end of each turn whilst stalling things out a bit further. So I think the main goal right now for Amin's side is to try to focus down on this Amoonguss as much as possible and try to survive the pressure coming out from this Dragonite. If not immediate pressure, it's the fact that it will have multiple turns that it can get multiple Ice Spinners into that slot.
Exactly. That Amoonguss, of course, being the only thing that can heal that Dragonite. It does have that regenerator ability, but no more Pokemon in the back to be switched out there. So meaning the Earthquake will do still a fair amount of damage to this Amoonguss, as we see the Amoonguss now enjoying his very nice berry.
Very nice.
Very nice. As the Dragonite goes for yet another Ice Spinner, just to try and damage as much as possible. Now, there is always one thing that is always possible. We do see the Pollen Puff as well, seeing a lot of damage onto this Dondozo, being over half of damage, but now, thanks to the leftovers, a bit more healing again. And the thing that can always happen is the magical words, the critical hits.
Yes, those words of which do fall in line with the caster's curse, right? But it is 100% a thing. But we're going to be seeing Earthquake coming out right now, enough to pick up the KO onto this Amoonguss, which Xabier didn't actually opt to try to protect a couple of times there. According to the team sheets, the Protect is available on Amoonguss. I feel like I would have preferred seeing more defensive plays from this Amoonguss. You're in a situation where Amin is very well aware of the Dragonite having the potential of having its multi-scale reactivated multiple times due to that Pollen Puff support, which at this point, Xabier just wanted to try to get as many ice spinners onto this Dondozo as he could, since super effective, but it's quite tough now, because I think this looks like it's going into Amin's favor.
It is definitely looking as if it's in Amin's favor, because you have to realize, even when you bring down this Dondozo, you still have that Tatsugiri, and then of course you have that Iron Bundle. Something that I do think is interesting. I think Xabier was trying to make sure that the Dondozo was going to protect while the Amogus could do an attack, so that it itself could protect on the turn that the Dondozo could attack as well. Trying to find the turns to protect at the right time is kind of difficult, because I'm trying to find when to do it. But well read by Amin there to just go for that Earthquake and killing that Amogus.
Exactly, as we are going to be seeing once again the sort of passive play that we're just talking a bit about, which Amin just wants to preserve this Dondozo as much as possible. If you're able to get that leftovers recovery to the point where Ice Spinner will not pick up a KO, at least you further increase the probability of you winning this game. I think just the fact that Amin has so many resources available to themselves is the most crucial thing here. Wave Crash deals a lot of damage, which is quite nice. Ice Spinner, of course, will retaliate, will pick up the KO, but we're in a situation, like you mentioned, Shimon, that we will have the Tatsugiri next to the Iron Bundle against the Dragonite, which is definitely not what Dragonite wants to be.
It's not what you
against.
like to see, honestly.
No.
The Tatsugiri also being a choice card variant, surely outspeeding the Dragonite as well at this point. And just looking at decent damage, at least from the extreme speed from Dragonite and the Dragon Pulse into the Dragonite, securing that Q, meaning this game goes to Amin.
Exactly, Amin is going to be winning this game 1 going into game 2. I think quite a bit of consistent play from Amin's side there, if I do say so myself. Being able to recognize what the win conditions were, if you're able to reposition yourself to the point where, okay, sure, you got a Glamora on the field that you have been able to utilize to a certain good extent, force Earth Powers, maybe even get a Mortal Spin set up. I think we saw a couple of procs with the Toxic Debris activating, I think, 2 layers worth, where that was due to the Jet Punch of the Palafin over on Xavier's side, which unfortunately just stayed on the field, right? It never switched out in order to try to obtain that hero form. I feel only because of the amount of pressure that that Iron Bundle had into that slot.
Exactly, Iron Bundle being on the field made it very hard for the Palafin itself to stay in and try to get as much damage in with that Jet Punch. On the other end, maybe trying to preserve the Palafin could have been a play, but then you have the Iron Bundle. What do you really switch in at that first time? Because you had Amogus and Dragonite in the back there earlier, meaning it would have been quite hard to switch anything into a freeze dry.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think that's sort of what we were initially looking into, and it confirmed it. Xavier did indeed have the Amogus and the Dragonite in the back. Those aren't Pokemon you could switch into a freeze dry. So I think from Javier's side, it would be really good if you can have at least something that can switch into it. Maybe even an Iron Hands. If you're able to bring that Pokemon in, at least you've got some counterplay. You've got Fake Out Pressure. If you've got to switch into that slot, Assault Vest, we know how bulky this Iron Hands is, even without an Assault Vest. So just adding that item to increase its special defensive bulk will just make it an absolute tank. And once you have that into effect and you've got some really good moves such as Close Combat, Wild Charge, and Volt Switch, there's a couple of things that you can do, as we do actually see it make an appearance.
Yep, the Iron Hands being on the field while the Iron Bundle and the Glamora are back again for more, and we see the Iron Bundle enjoying that booster energy. Baxcalibur also being back, meaning it could go for potential Terrestrialize again with that poison typing. We have the Iron Hands can go for a Fake Out as well, meaning that Iron Bundle for 1 turn at least will not be able to move, or you just go for the damage because you know that this Iron Bundle already doesn't have a Focus Sash. We see the Protect coming out from this Iron Bundle, trying to make sure that it doesn't get affected, as we see the Fake Out into the Glamora actually, trying to make sure that at least that does not move this turn. It was And then, of course, we do see the big damage there, of course, thanks to the Glaive Rush. And Glaive Rush, big damage there with the live orb, but still that Glimora is still hanging on.
It really just goes to show the testament of how much Bolt has been trained into this Glimora, being able to accept not only, of course, the fake out, but this Glaive Rush coming out from a life orb Excalibur is no small feat. It is a lot of damage from a very highly offensive Pokemon. So I think it's a really good play from Xabier. So just prioritizing the Glimora. You know that there's no Protect that will come out from that slot. And of course, Amin recognizes how much work that Iron Bundle put in for himself in Game 1. So surely that will be target number 1 in Xabier's point of view. So I think this will sort of be a bit of a battle of, right, how can you get rid of the Iron Bundle, but also how can you prevent any sort of combo of the Dondozo Tatsugiri from coming out?
We do see the Ice Shard coming out from the Excalibur, going into that Glimmer, finally being able to take that out, while the while the Iron Bundle going for a freeze dry into that Iron Hand, not doing that much damage, and we see a close combat into that Iron Bundle, even being able to take that out. So suddenly, I'm losing 2 Pokemon there, but as we have seen in Game 1, there is that potential combo that is very, very strong. That can be in the bag as well. No poison on either of these Pokemon, though, which means that they will not get chipped as much as well.
Well, exactly, because they're still on the field, even though the Toxic Debris has set up the Toxic Spikes. The most crucial thing here is what we were talking about, the adaptation from Xabier's side by bringing this Iron Hands. Immediately we've seen the impact it's had in Game 2. We're already, I believe, in turn 3 right now, with a 4 versus 2 advantage for Xabier, and now Dondozo Tatsugiri, yes, it is powerful. Yes, of course, it does have the Omnibus present. However, you know there's no other Pokemon that can be switched out or switched in. This is a situation where you need to really prioritize on slowing down this Dondozo. Yes, it has leftovers, but it does not have substitute. You want to try to focus down as best as possible going into this. Iron Hands is susceptible to any sort of ground-type moves, such as Earthquake, but we do still have Terra available over on Xabier's side.
And we do the switch out, see the switch out from the Iron Hands into that Amoonguss. It is back again, making sure that those Toxic Spikes disappear because, of course, Amoonguss being a poison type can remove any sort of Toxic Spikes, while the Dondozo actually just going for a Protect, seeing what is going on here and seeing what is going to happen, not wanting to proc his possible terrestrialization either because, of course, Amoonguss wasn't on the field yet, but now the Amoonguss is on the field. But Excalibur is as well, and Excalibur can do a lot of damage to grass types.
Well, exactly, and it can now avoid the double damage that it would have normally accepted post the Glaive Rush move being in effect. We saw the interaction there, of course, since Excalibur was the final remaining Pokemon that had not protected just yet. Its Protect did fail. Grass Terra type from this Dondozo. It does go for the Earthquake. It wants to avoid any sort of spores. Deals over half of Excalibur's HP's worth. Will be, of course, now, like we mentioned, immune to the spores. So in this scenario, it's quite tough because we've got to take into consideration what options does Amin have to go up against this, and there may have actually been a miss there of Icicle Crash, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think you're right there as well, because we did see the Excalibur not do any moves, but also being quite surprised how much damage it did to this Amoonguss still.
Yeah.
Like, that was only a little under half, which is quite impressive because Amoonguss is, of course, one of those physically, is a very bulky Pokemon, and a nice switch to Dragonite, trying to make sure that Earthquake doesn't hurt it as well, while the Amoonguss went for a Protect, just trying to see what other positioning could help here versus this Dondozo as well.
So Earthquake coming out yet again. We're in a very similar situation to Game 1 when we have the Amoonguss next to the Dragonite. Oh, it's just going to survive on 10 hit points there. But going back to the Icicle Crash miss, that's quite big. Yes, it might not be in the long run, but for at least in the immediate run, not having that additional damage dealt onto the Dondozo is quite bad. You want to put the pressure on now that you have more resources available. I still feel like Xabier should have enough to be able to round this Game 2 out and force a Game 3, but we just got to take into consideration, I mean, what sort of win conditions do you have at this point? You need to get rid of the Amoonguss. The moment you get rid of Amoonguss, at least you'd get a sort of play, open up a bit further to maybe pick up a KO critical hit into a Grass Terror type Iron Hands following in subsequent turns, but that's not going to be the case. Amungus is going to be going down for the count in Game 2, and we are likely to see yet again an Ice Spinner go into the Dondozo, now bringing it just below half of its HP.
Yeah, Dondozo, of course, being the only Pokemon on the field, meaning it is taking a lot of damage there, and meaning Baxcalibur can now switch in as well, or potentially even that Iron Hands, and Iron Hands being able to threaten with a possible Fake Out, meaning that the Dondozo can go for Protect, of course, but yeah, you're just protecting for a turn, you're just like, it's going to happen eventually. You are going to get hit by this Dragonite, this Ice Spinner. But we do see the double switch, trying to make sure that if the Iron Hands is in, that you get a successful Fake Out. The Protect going in, so Baxcalibur in safely as well. Very nice to see, as Dragonite trying to go for another Ice Spinner.
It's quite a nice play, because you're anticipating the obvious Protect coming out from the Dondozo. So you would much rather preserve resources for a future turn, have the Fake Out available in 1 or 2 further turns down the line, whilst having the situation where you've got a Baxcalibur and the Dragonite. The Dondozo is forced to either go for one move per turn. So let's say Earthquake, you try to at least deal some good damage onto the Baxcalibur, but maybe Wave Crash into the Dragonite so you can target it down. So at this point, we've just got the capability of, or should I say the incapability of the Dondozo not being able to land a spread move onto both of Xabier's Pokemon, as we are going to be seeing the Flying Terror type Dragonite make an appearance here. We'll be trying to go for a maximum amount of damage with the Terra Blast into the Grass Terra Dondozo. Ice Shard will come out first and will be immediately followed up by likely the Dondozo opting to go for the Earthquake. It does pick up the KO onto Baxcalibur in complete fairness. However, for those endeavors, it will be responded with a Terra Blast, focusing down on it, does pick up the KO. The Dondozo is out for the count. And finally, we're in a situation where Xabier has the Fake Out available on the field once the Iron Hands does land.
Exactly, keeping that Fake Out in the back just to be sure, because that Tatsugiri is that Choice Scarf variant. We have seen how much Extreme Speed doing a little bit over half there earlier in the previous game. But now, just making sure that this Tatsugiri will go down in just one hit with one Fake Out plus a Terra Blast.
Excellently played from Xabier there, being able to really focus down on board state comprehension. You want to be able to position yourself very nicely from the mid to end game scenario to very swift KOs. And I think that is what proved to be quite detrimental to Amin's gameplay there. You're in a scenario where versus, in comparison to game 1, you still had those resources available. I think there was an Iron Bundle, even though the Glamora did get KO'd in game 1. It did set up, I guess, a couple of toxic debris that didn't really come to effect. But the most important thing is the fact that Iron Bundle was still available in the back when the Dondozo Tatsugiri was in. So you always had that sort of cushion to rely on in the back. However, game 2, the Iron Bundle, it just went down. It was left in a situation where it was vulnerable to a close combat one-hit KO from the Iron Hands, which seemed to be the perfect adaptation to Xabier's game.
Exactly. Iron Hands putting in massive amounts of work, and it could have been a lot of different things that could have happened that turn, because of course you could have seen, like, for example, a double switch there to that Tatsugiri, trying to make sure that one move already doesn't hit, give the Dondozo that boost. But just correctly being able to close combat this Iron Bundle, just get it out.
Well, yeah, that's it. And I think that's the sort of role that Xabier was looking to be able to get and actually dispatch of the Iron Bundle. So Iron Hands, no doubt in my mind, it will be coming back in Game 3. Now the question is, how can Amin directly deal with it? Is that via a Dondozo Tatsugiri lead in anticipation of the Iron Hands, or is this by a great Tusk Brain, which I gotta say, it's a great bring indeed, going up against the Iron Hands and Baxcalibur over on Xabier's side. Already loving the adaptation from Amin.
Exactly, and suddenly seeing this previously that worked so well in Game 2, Now a little bit less because that Great Tusk, of course, having that headlong rush and the close combat to hit Excalibur and the Iron Hands with, but you have to remember Iron Hands does have that fake out option, and you do not want to get faked out with if you have a potential protecting Pokemon, and certainly not if your Pokemon, your Great Tusk, has that Focus Sash.
Well, yeah, exactly. I think that sort of gives the initiative for Amin to go for a protect, but that could be obviously red, and that could be counterplayed by Xabier. So it'll just depend on the sort of tap that each of the players have against each other. No Terror type. Headlong Rush goes straight into the Iron Hands, but because of how bulky this Pokemon is, it's going to be able to survive this. If there was any sort of damage boosting item, it would have surely gone down, and it may actually go down at the end of this turn due to the Mortal Spin poison stat, but I think it's just outside of range. Close combat goes into the Glamora, doesn't even deal a 2-hit KO there. Does get, of course, the drops due to the close combat secondary effect, as we do have the toxic debris now on the field, but we know that this can immediately get removed, but no, it does actually go down immediately in turn 1. This is very, very big for Amin, being able to actually capitalize off of bringing Great Tusk in turn 1 and just saying, you know what, right, I'm not going to expect any sort of Terror type there. I'm going straight for damage, and they did it exceptionally well.
That was a great play because in the previous game, in game 2, you have, of course, that Glamora with that Assault Vest cannot protect. Now, this time around, the Iron Hands also having that Assault Vest can protect, can fake out, but what a call out to make, right? Knowing that it would not have faked out, and you can just go for the Headlong Rush for as much damage as possible. Amoonguss on the field, removing the Toxic Spikes, but already losing the Iron Hands is very detrimental there. It will change the game plan entirely for later on as well. Now, Excalibur, of course, still a bit threatened by that Great Tusk and by that Glamora, because that Glamora not even have taken half of its health away.
Well, I mean, talk about spinning a matchup in your favor with that poison type Mortal Spin. Very good adaptation, like we've mentioned. I think having the Amoonguss on the field, yes, there is redirection potential. However, we've got to take into consideration the amount of damage output that is available for Amin over on their side. They could just try to go ahead, get the Mortal Spin going. Yet again, you want to make sure that at least you can pick it up on the Excalibur if it hasn't already been affected by it. But we are going to be seeing the Rage Powder. Headlong Rush targets down the slot, or should I say gets redirected straight into it. Will get further drops in its defense and special defense now at -2 stages for both on the Great Tusk. Citrus Berry recovery, yes, it is going to provide a bit more of a further cushion for this Amoonguss to extend its longevity, but the Icicle Crash picks up the KO onto the Glamora. Now 2 layers of poison or toxic spikes available on the field, and the Amoonguss is present. So if it's forced to switch out, whichever Pokemon is switching back in will incur the toxic status if it is not immune.
Yeah, this is, it was a good play by that Excalibur, just trying to make sure to get rid of that Glamora, because that Glamora was slower than it as well. Now, of course, with the -2 defenses on the Great Tusk, it is a little bit more manageable, because you do have that Ice Shard, for example, and even Amoonguss with a Pollen Puff could do quite a bit of damage.
Right.
And we do see our big friend Dondozo yet again. So this is the play that you can make. You can switch out that Great Tusk for that Tatsugiri, and if, of course, Xabier was focusing down on that slot, that means that that went down. We do seem to have a small issue, but it will be resolved quickly. So let's talk about the potential of that Tatsugiri switching in there instead of that Great Tusk.
So in that situation, we know that the Focus Sash was not broken yet on the Great Tusk, so even though it had the drops, yes, it was in a situation where it can switch out for the Tatsugiri. It would be a relatively easy switch, like you mentioned. Quite interesting to actually get confirmation, or near suggestive confirmation, that there's a potential that the Iron Bundle isn't in the back, right?
Yeah.
Because surely, since we've seen the Dondozo, the Tatsugiri needs to be in the back to give a bit of assistance to its bigger brother, let's say.
Exactly. It's it was quite a difficult position, but like that call out from game 3, that is when you have to make them. You need to make those predictions, especially when you're back against the wall. It's hit or miss, and just go for it. Sometimes you gotta go with your gut.
Well, you got to go with your gut, and it worked exceptionally well for Amin in combination with the Mortal Spin. I really thought it was so close to actually the 18 remaining hit points for the Iron Hands to go down, but it makes a lot of sense because of how vast of a HP pool the Iron Hands does have. So that's going to be ticking a bit more than what the average Pokemon would in regards to the damage dealt by that poison status at the end of the turn. But so actually seeing that come into play left a lot of breathing room for Amin. You're in a scenario where if you're Xabier, you lost one of the crucial Pokemon that essentially awarded you that game to win because of its immediate fake out pressure as well as offensive pressure, but with the electric type moves as well as that close combat, absolutely annihilating the Iron Bundle.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a good adaptation to, instead of bringing some future mounts, look back at the past, get that Great Tusk out, because that Great Tusk doing a lot of damage, doing a lot of potential damage, of course, to like Excalibur with that close combat potential, and it's just a very good adaptation. And sometimes you gotta think 2 steps ahead. So maybe Xabier must have thought about what if they bring the Great Tusk? Maybe we should have brought then the Palafin to try and help with that. But you can keep going on like that. It's depending of those mind games that you have to play with your opponent as well.
We could theory craft as many different scenarios
exactly.
as we have time to keep the stream show going. But yes, we'll be here up until next week. So best not to kind of indulge with that. But I think what we're going to have to do, obviously, elephant in the room, and I'm not talking about Don Fan. I was going to say Great Tusk, not Don Fan, poor Don Fan. But Great Tusk. In this scenario, we're just going to go ahead and get a couple of checks done by the judges just to sort of highlight and see what went wrong and what we can actually do in order to get that vital game 3 going, because it wasn't completely out, right? So it still was up in the air. Sure, the advantage was in Amin's favor because of that very crucial turn 1, but there's always room to be able to sort of bring it back if you are Xabier, especially when you have such a great Pokemon like Amoonguss, which adds a lot of support and utility to anyone's team in conjunction with, let's say, a Excalibur. Very offensive. We saw the Ice Shard pick up KO2. You've got the priority and maybe a Dragonite switch in and out in the back so you can get rid of the toxic spikes at a future turn and sort of play a bit around with the switch synergy, which those Pokemon have quite nicely.
Exactly, and as you mentioned, it could have been a Dragonite in the back, of course, not being affected by those toxic spikes, not being poisoned, and that strong Terra flying, of course, Terra Blast going into a possible Dondozo, because that Dondozo is kind of forced to go for that Terra Grass there, because Amoonguss is still a big threat to it with those spores. Like, you don't want to put anything, you don't want your Dondozo, your main attacker, to be felt by just a little bit of sleep.
Well, that's it. I think that's why it's been optimized for it, right? So in order to get that sort of anticipation of the matchups, you just got to go ahead and essentially choose the right Terra type. You know, what can take that strategy down? Yes, Amoonguss is a very big thorn in my side when it comes to my Dondozo, so of course I would really like opting to go for that Terra type too.
Yeah. It is interesting to see to what the possibilities are. As you said, theory crafting is always possible there, and it's just hard to say, honestly, because as we mentioned, there was always the possibility of that Tatsugiri switch. There was possibility of just it staying in because it still had that focus sash. There were just a lot of factors there.
No, there most definitely were, but we're going to have to try to find out shortly. We have been informed, of course, there are 2 current scenarios based off of that disconnection that may come out to play. So we've got the first scenario where a game loss may be issued to the unfortunate trainer that did actually incur the disconnection, or there is another scenario of a potential game declared null going into sudden death.
Yeah, that is also, of course, that is something that can happen. We are still playing with technology where we have no thoughts of what could happen. Joking aside, it can always happen, and we just have to try and deal with it as best as we can.
100%.
Yeah, and we want to have to make a fair decision. We have to try and follow the rules and see what exactly happened. That is why we have these rules just set, just because sometimes it's needed.
Well, exactly. I think I could probably flash back to a moment where I've had to actually experience sudden death, which was very stressing, to say the least. There was a lot of pressure going on. It was actually during my Worlds endeavor last Worlds, actually, in 2022, London, where I went up against a very tough opponent, Mr. Torviv himself, running his team against him, which was even more dramatic. So
yeah, no, that's...
he saw the team and he's like, oh no. And he was running a completely different team. And I was like, oh yeah, sorry about that.
My bad.
But yeah, so there was a situation where unfortunately there was a disconnection in a very crucial moment in Game 3, where unfortunately at the time he most definitely had the advantage. I think it was roughly at around a 75% in his favor, 25 in mine.
Yeah.
But it turns out because of the disconnection, unfortunately hit from his side, the game was declared null.
Yeah.
And then we did go into sudden death. And that was quite high octane pressure, because you're in a scenario where we both knew what we had to do. You had multiple interactions of Tailwind being set up and a couple of Dynamax protects in order to protect from the other offensive Pokemon. We're both running Tornadus Incarnate, and the rule with sudden death is the fact that if you at any point have a Pokemon advantage over your opponent within the end of a turn, you will be declared the winner. So whoever picks up one KO first, whilst the opponent or the other player does not pick up a KO, that is indeed the condition that you will be able to be declared the winner.
Exactly. So if Tatsugiri would jump into Donzo's mouth, that's not that Tatsugiri is fainted. It's just not there for a second. It will come out later on. But that will be interesting to see, because of course you have the Dondozo being very bulky on its own, and trying to KO that, it has always been like a difficulty. And while on the other hand, quite an offensive team to be run with that Terra Blast from the Dragonite, and you have the Pollen Puff, Amoonguss trying to keep everything alive really that you have. So if in a situation like that, hard to decide what to do there.
There'll be a lot of different things to take into consideration. That's the sort of situation where you change from being strategic with board state, understanding, and sort of like getting those very cool switches. It's more like, okay, no, I need to really pick up a KO whilst preventing my opponent from getting any sort of one-hit KO potential going, such as, let's say, that interaction of the Great Tusk, Headlong Rush, into, of course, the
Iron Hands.
Iron Hands, thank you very much. With the combination of the Mortal Spin, from that moment on, since there was only one KO picked up at that turn, that would have declared Amin as the victor, for example.
Yeah, something like that is, of course, very scary, because like switches can be made, and of course, if you try to decide to attack with both Pokemon into one slot, there's always that possibility of protect, while the other Pokemon actually just goes for an attack.
Yeah, and I think, so, entertainment value-wise, amazing. However, if you are the players, it is it's a lot.
That's why I'm sitting on this side. It is very much. But we seem to have gotten an update, actually.
Well, we will still wait for final confirmation at the current point, but we do know that the judges are working very hard with the trainers in order to make sure that we get the absolute sort of confirmedness of making sure things are fair. It's an unfortunate situation. You know, you don't want to be in a scenario where, you know, your tournament life is on the line down to a disconnection, just because that's outside of the gameplay. You know, it's not down to any of the trainers' fault. It's just how, unfortunately, just the software has decided to have a hitch at the time.
Yeah, it just happens. It's not a player's fault. It's not like, it is something that can happen at any time with almost any game, really. Like, there are hiccups that can happen, interactions that shouldn't happen as well. it is one of those things where you got to realize games are hard to make.
They are. Oh my lord, they definitely are. But whilst we are obviously waiting, we've got a lot of players that we know have really put their best to the medal of being able to further progress their career, their VGC career, and their chances of getting the title. We know, for example, we've discussed previously, the past couple of days, we had chats, of course, with Alex Soto as well as Baz, where, you know, it was quite nice to actually get their insight when it came to how they would prepare for the tournament and what they think will be the sort of threats. So I think something that people have been picking up on, and we did see featured in that match, is the Glamora Assault Fest. You've got the Mortal Spin, which is so cool. We've seen more offensive Glamoras in the past. I think, of course, we've seen them ran quite often in the American regionals, where we've even seen it go undefeated multiple times.
True.
I think that may have been a Specs, if I'm not mistaken.
You're not wrong. It is a Specs.
Yes, so being able to see that sort of adaptation more towards the Assault Vest variant, we've got a bit more bold. We saw how well it actually took
it was quite
Excalibur's
amazing.
Glaive Rush Life Orb, right? That's not something that you can easily sort of survive.
It was quite amazing to see, because most of the time you want your Glamora to be hit physically. That's why the Assault Vest, to try and make sure that I can be one-hit KO'd, as early as we saw with the mouse hold, and it being that bulky, trying to guarantee 2 layers of toxic spikes at least, trying to make that timer, like the timer on the Pokemon itself, go just that little bit faster.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the thing. So being able to sort of further the pace of having the residual damage dealt at the end of each turn is a quite nice tactic. It makes a lot of sense. I think the only thing that you got to be wary of is any sort of steel-type Pokemon actually hopping in or switching in. And conversely, any sort of Steel Terra types, I think we've seen a couple already, like Iron Jugulars, even the Fluttermane from the other round where Michael versus Juan Manuel was able to exhibit it. Maybe not necessarily against a Mortal Spin sort of interaction, but we do know that Steel types are very big when it comes to a choice of Terra, dependent on certain matchups, because you've got those threats like the Golden Goes, where they're able to deal the Make It Rain damage output. You want to be able to resist it. So there's a lot of interesting sort of scenarios to take into consideration when you're team building for an event as big as this.
That is absolutely true. And like adapting to something like this, because the Glamora has been rising in usage really, and like preparing for that. I feel a lot of people have been preparing for it, but I do feel like this entire special event has been built around Glamora as being like the main player of this region.
It's been like a glue.
It's been very good, yeah.
To put onto a team, right?
Exactly, because early when I was talking as well to our Perth regional champion, as
Perth, Tyron Birdie.
I was right.
You were right indeed.
But
he is from the UK, but he did make the trip down under.
Respectable, honestly. But it is interesting to see how good that Glamora was working after him. And he said it himself earlier. He had like another team with his Torquad, but only bring it really once. While this Glamora that he brought, every game has been putting in the amount of work that it needed to do as well.
Yeah, exactly that. So it has been able to put in a lot of work for its trainers. It is one of those very nice picks in order, of course, to navigate your way through this current meta. But I believe we have got confirmation of our stream match between Xabier and Amin. And unfortunately, there has been a game loss that has been declared and given to Amin. So that does mean, as a direct result, that Xabier is the victor of that round 7, which is really, really good. It's able to actually push him into the 6-1 region. So being able to be one win away from progressing to Day 2 Swiss is a big, big feat. And unfortunate for Amin. Amin's not out.
Nope,
still
absolutely.
X2, still can just win out from this point onwards to make it into Day 2 as well.
Exactly. At this point, you must be tasting that one final victory. You smell, you taste it, you feel it. It is close. And of course, Amin has been playing immaculately, like showcasing how well he was playing. Like, I do believe that we can certainly see him in Day 2 as well. I do believe that certainly can't happen.
No, most definitely can. But, of course, only the future can tell. Future Shmon and Future Costa will be able to tell you tomorrow. So stay tuned. But no, this isn't going to be the end of the stream just yet. What we are doing at the current moment is we are preparing to get the winner's interview, where we will, of course, be featuring Xabier. So just double checking to see if everything is set up right now. We still haven't got confirmation just yet, but it's been exciting. It's been very fun, this entire event so far. We are reaching the end, the later stages of the tournament, should I say. So being able to see the amount of variety when it comes to the teams, as well as the commonalities between the teams, you know, the very high usage Pokemon and how they're being utilized. I think something that I really want to call out and I love to see was that round 2 match between Niels and Buzz, where we saw the Covert Cloak Iron Bundle put in so much work in order to sort of avoid any icy wind drops onto its person from any opposing Iron Bundle.
It is interesting to see because, like, booster energy, of course, you get the boosted speed boost, but what if your speed never gets lowered?
Well, that's it. Or any snarls don't impact you as well.
It is interesting to see what players seem to find what works for them, because we have seen a few Covert Cloaks as well, because earlier we had a Golden Go with Covert Cloak as well. Also very interesting to see, just making sure that it doesn't get affected by any secondary, for example, a Salt Cure effect.
Exactly, the secondary effect of it where it chips, and especially with the water type, it has, you know, 1/4, I believe, of damage dealt to it at each residual end of the turn.
Which is quite a lot, so making sure that it doesn't go down with that is actually a pretty good position to have, which is really good to see. And of course, we are nearing the end, meaning a lot of players will already go have confirmation of day 2, meaning, but we're close for the next one.
We are indeed, and we have gotten confirmation that unfortunately there will be no winners interview. So what we will do instead is we'll hop over to a break. Very short one, hopefully, before we can get round 8 started, the penultimate round going into this day 1. So don't go anywhere, or maybe do get some snacks maybe for us as well. We'd very much appreciate it. Some refreshments, but we will be back very shortly, so we'll see you soon.